Okay, perfect. So thank you for being present today for our webinar on NIS2, ensure compliance with the NIS2 directive. Our agenda today is very, very busy, so I will switch quickly on our program. So basically, we will be 4 speakers today. I will let each of one present themselves before their own speech. As this topic is very wide, we try to cover this topic from 3 complementary point of views. So I will let Cassandra introduce herself, and I will present myself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cassandra Laguette. I am from Devoteam Cybertrust, an entity that is all about cybersecurity. I'm a consultant in governance, risk, and compliance.
And I'm also a consultant at Devoteam Cybertrust. So our first topic today is we'll deal with the main question: how NIS2 will have a lasting impact on the way of seeking and managing cybersecurity in Europe. All of us know that cyberspace has become a crucial vector for cyber offensive operations for a large number of state and not-state players in Europe, as well for activists and criminals. The NIS1 directive was adopted in 2016 in this way, and in this context of the increasing tension in the cyberspace. NIS1 was at this time the first piece of legislation on cybersecurity in Europe. Since then, many cyber attacks have occurred on the European territory, as well in different countries abroad, and targeting essential governments, entities such as hospitals or state organizations with the aim of political, geopolitical, and reputational destabilization. This is actually visible on the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, where the increase in cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure such as nuclear plants has become more and more frequent.
And in fact, more and more sectors or activities end up impacted by cyber attacks, and in turn impacting the proper functioning and safety of our society and economics. The multiplication of cyber attacks in Europe has not spared smaller entities as well. In fact, here in France, the Cybersecurity Authority, the ANSSI, has estimated that around 52% of ransomware attacks in 2021 and 2022 were aimed against small and medium-sized entities, the SMEs.
And in this context, with the increase in cyber attacks and target member states had to significantly expand their list of organizations, sanctions, and obligations in the scope of the previous text, the NIS1. Through the different years, different scandals and big cyber attacks news, more and more differences between national applications became apparent, living in the different European countries with an uneven and ineffective protection system and very, very poor cooperation.
This is actually where NIS2 comes into play. It was always the EU legislator intent to have NIS1 revised after a few years. In fact, this is actually in the text of NIS1, not only to take into account any changes or developments in technologies and context, but also because NIS1 was always more of a trial run. If we move to the next slide, you will see that NIS2 falls within the European Digital Single Market Strategy for 2030, and more specifically, the so-called Digital Security and Cooperation Program. This program is a program that aims to identify the challenges of securing networks and information systems in Europe. Its goal is to place the prevention of cyber threats and member state cooperation as pillars of the EU transition to a digital tomorrow.
While NIS1 left complete freedom to the different member states in the European Union in terms of cybersecurity obligation, the NIS2 directive is very specific in order to avoid the huge discrepancies currently noticeable between member states in the application of the NIS1 directive. Sorry? Oh, sorry. And the question of what is important to keep in mind in that NIS2 is a part of a very dense legislative framework. It must necessarily be reconciled on one hand with more high-level texts, which NIS2 complements on the second hand, with sectoral regulation, which complement NIS2 itself and apply in addition to or in parallel with it. There are more specific regulations that under the principle of lex specialis, that means it is a Latin word meaning the application of a specific law prevail over that the general law. For example, if you have a specific regulation on the financial sector, then it will be this text that will apply and not the text of the NIS2. And then it will be fully replace NIS2 instead of the application of the directive. And finally, it is important to tackle NIS2 in light of other EU texts, which are not specific to information system security, but cover other aspects of the EU digital action strategy. This should be mentioned before because they often apply to entities covered by NIS2 and evolve fully resilience measure useful for compliance with NIS2, but also could have high impact about sanction in case of non-compliance. For example, we notice that digital operation resilience in the Financial Sector Act, the DORA text. We therefore strongly recommend you to conduct analysis of the regulation applicable to our sector of activity in order to optimize your compliance program. And you have to keep in mind that you have also some very broad piece of legislation, such as GDPR, would apply to your organization and which are totally complementary to the NIS2, such as the GDPR.
So now if we take a look at the improvements and novelties of NIS2, you can see that the sectoral scope of NIS1 included a total of 30 types of entities. On the other hand, NIS2 has a lot more sectors and subsectors with a grand total of 67 types of entities. On top of that, NIS2 now includes all entities, regardless of their size, under certain conditions. This is in response to the increasing number of cyber attacks against SMEs that we mentioned earlier. NIS2 compliance now also applies to the supply chain of all of these entities.
A very surprising measure in the NIS2 directive are the ex-ante compliance audits. Ex-ante, it means that audits performed previous the application of your measure of your start of your information system by national cybersecurity authorities. The text also indicates very short deadlines for incidents notifications to the authorities, and this is totally a novelty. 24 hours for the first one, 70 hours for a more detailed report, and 1 month for a formal report. And it is also of note that the directive lists detailed technical and organizational measures related to risk management. The Commission will actually publish more detailed information about what an important incident means. We don't have the clear definition of what it is an important incident at this moment, and add to the list of security measures before the transposition deadline in October 2024. In this, the Commission shows it will be fully involved in the process, but we already have a clear idea on what a very impact incident could be and what a very important incident means.
NIS1, as you can see, left complete freedom to states when it came to sanctions, which actually increased the discrepancies between member states. NIS2 rectifies this by setting up clear sanction minimums. Keep in mind that sanctions will also depend on the category of entity we're talking about. NIS2, as we are going to see in just a minute, differentiates between essential and important entities. This is mainly based on their size, but there are also other criteria in play.
And last but not least, and maybe it's not the more interesting piece of this legislation, but one of the goals of the NIS2 directive is to encourage member state cooperation. It has therefore created the EU Cyclone Organization, an EU cybersecurity body for the preparations and management of cross-border cybersecurity crises in Europe.
NIS2 is known for the wide expansion of its scope to many sectors which were not mentioned in NIS1. Some of these sectors were, however, identified during the transposition process of NIS1 by member states. But we also mentioned before that there were a lot of discrepancies in this process. It was very uneven across member states, which is why NIS2 actually includes a lot more sectors and subsectors. And this confirms the selection process that was made by some of the member states already. The scope of NIS1 included public or private entities above a certain size. Again, this excluded some SMEs. These were referred to as operators of essential services, the OES, and as digital service providers, DSPs.
NIS2 completely abandons the differentiation between operator of essential services and digital services providers, preferring to include the digital service providers depending on their own criticality. In one of its two new category of sector of high criticality listed in the Annex 1, and other critical sector lists in its Annex 2. On this slide, you can see that there are new sectors, all operating of essential services of NIS1 are covered in the sector of high criticality, together with 4 new sectors. On the other hand, the critical sector are all new sectors which are not included in the NIS1, except for online marketplaces and search engine. Outside from the sectoral expansion, the biggest novelties of NIS2 when it comes to its scope are that SMEs are included under certain criteria. And that in each of the sector operators are required to verify compliance of their supply chain.
This actually means that even though your organization might not fit one of the type of entities that are listed in Annexes 1 and 2, if your customers or prospects are in this list, then they should require you to comply with NIS2. In any case, we recommend, it would be smart to maintain customer trust and to stay competitive to show compliance with NIS2 prior to the transposition and from the start.
At Devo team, we have established a method to prepare for NIS2, which are already following successfully with our customers. Understanding which sector and which category of entity your organization are, some of your entity belong to, is the first step of this method, as it is crucial to understand how NIS2 will impact your business. And I will skip quickly on this slide. The question that often comes is, when should I start preparing for NIS2?
So the short answer to this question is that you should start as soon as possible. Waiting for its transposition would be a mistake. Now that the text of the directive has been adopted last December, and although the national transpositions may bring some specificities, the text in its final version, as we're going to see, is sufficiently precise to serve as a basis for the evaluations necessary for a good preparation.
That means that member states have until October 2024 for its transposition. For organization impact by NIS2, this means less than a year and a half to make their preparation evaluation, draw up an action plan, and implement corrective action that sometimes require complete review of their governance, of course, to allow for an effective incident reporting mechanism. Therefore, evaluating its survey operation and compliance with NIS2 at this stage is not only possible, but also strongly recommend to identify particular gaps and understand the schedule and cost involved in the remediation plans. And the question is therefore not when to prepare, but how.
Keep in mind that if your organization is a large group or a conglomerate of entities, it is very likely that these entities do not all have the same activities and can find themselves in different categories of NIS2, which would impact them differently. Now, this list of sector we have on the screen is nice, but what does it actually mean? Are there differences between essential and between high criticality and critical sectors? This is where NIS2 becomes more complex. The difference in treatment between different entities does not lie in the separation between Annexes 1 and 2. Instead, NIS2 separates entities between essential entities and important entities based on certain criteria. Entities from Annex 1 and 2 can end up in one or the other category.
For the purpose of NIS2, essential entities are entities from the Annex 1 and Annex 2, which first exceed the ceiling for medium-sized enterprise under EU law, which are medium-sized or bigger or a provider of public communication network or publicly available telephone communication, regardless of their size, qualified first service provider, top-level domain name registries, DNS service providers, some local public administrations, not national at the national level, or other entities identified by a member states as essential during the transposition. It is important to notice that important entities are basically all the rest entities mentioned in the Annex 1 or 2 that are not considered essential.
So what are the differences between essential entities and important entities? Well, basically, nearly nothing. The obligations are the same. The only thing that change are the administrative fines and the ex-ante controls by national authorities.
Okay, so when it comes to the methodology, the range of security or organizational requirements introduced by NIS2 directive is very, very wide, from internal control to access management of vulnerability, handling and incident reporting. This requires the implementation of a variety of processes, policies, and documentations. This is why strategy to assist you in the NIS2 preparation relies on 360 degrees macro audits to understand first your level of maturity in terms of government protection, incident management, and crisis management.
Such a preparatory analysis has also other advantages. In some case, the NIS2 compliance analysis that we have performed for our customers have revealed critical security risks and organizational deficiencies, which were then corrected, thus improving the organization's resilience regardless of the preparation to NIS2.
No. These are the main contours that we use in our methodology of the main credits to help you to understand your global maturity level in the context of the NIS2 and come up with an action plan to ensure readiness by the transposition deadline. But in fact, we also propose some tools and solutions which will help you to evaluate your level of maturity and compliance with NIS2. And for this, we will now hand the floor to our colleague from Integrity in Portugal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin and Cassandra. I will start by presenting myself. I'm Aurelio Maia. I'm sorry. I will start by presenting myself. I'm Aurelio Maia. I'm the Director of Consulting Services at the Integrity part of the Devo team. Our main experience is helping our customers in implementing and maintain information management systems aligned with the standards and regulations, namely ISO 27001, NIST CSF, NIS1 and NIS2, and of course GDPR. I'll start by show you a common approach we use to address the compliance management process inside the organization. First of all, the first functional domain we address is how to manage all the documented information because standards and regulations all have policies, procedures, and rules, and we have to manage the life cycle of that documented information. The second functional domain in that common approach are activities, because all those documents impose some activities, some management and operation activities. So we have to control those activities. We have to know who does what in terms of the compliance management. Then a third domain would be the assessment. So we would like to assess the compliance and the maturity regarding the standards or regulations, not just for the companies itself, but also for the third parties that deals with the company. Another functional domain that is important in that common approach is risk management. So we have to define, if there is no one yet in the organization, we have to define and to personalize a risk management process. This is to say, we have to be able to identify risks, to analyze them and to treat them. Then another functional domain that is very important is workflows, because whenever we have procedures, we have to deal with workflows. So we have to model and operationalize all the needed workflows to deal with the compliance, to deal with the compliance management of the standard and regulation we want to be compliant. And the last functional domain, but not least, is that we have to demonstrate whenever it is necessary, laws, the standard and regulation, how we deal with that. So we have to have, let's say, a set of compliance notes where we can link all the artifacts that we are doing, documents, activities, risks, whatever it is. We have to link them to those compliance notes and demonstrate the conformity. So having this common approach in mind, we'll propose a roadmap to the NIS compliance. First of all, we have to define the scope of NIS2 application inside each organization. That is to say, we have to identify the services and critical activities that are object of the Article 2, where there is defined the scope for each company. So having those services and critical activities identified, we also have to identify all related information assets, because the information assets that support the services and activities will be the candidates to identify risks and to manage those risks. The second phase for this roadmap compliance is to perform a gap analysis. Gap analysis in terms of compliance, but also in terms of maturity, not just for the company itself, the organization itself, but also for the supply chain, all the third parties that are involved in the provisioning of services and critical activities. The third phase will be to elaborate and to put on the table all the documented information that is mandatory for NIS2. In that case, there is some examples that I took from the Article 21. So there is a list of documented information that is mandatory, that has to be built, that has to be approved and communicated to the organization. Then, as I said before, we have to establish, if there is no one yet in the company, we have to establish a risk management process, operationalize that process, that is to say, identify information security risks regarding the services and related information assets, analyze those risks, and establish a risk treatment plan. That's a very important phase that will allow us to deal with the real risk that we are facing. Then we have also to consolidate and establish the incident management process. Here for NIS2, this phase is very important because we have some obligations regarding the notification of incidents, and we have to be careful about who must notify what at what time. So this is a very key, let's say, procedure inside the overall picture of the obligations of NIS. So this is a very important phase. And finally, in this roadmap, of course, we have to demonstrate whenever it is necessary that we are aligned, we are compliant with all the obligations, with all the requirements that are inside the NIS2. So this is what we proposed. At the bottom, we identified the main modules that we can use from GRC2, in that case GRC Integrity GRC2, and right now I'll give the floor to my colleague that will present a use case in the platform, Integrity GRC platform, to demonstrate the feasibility of having this roadmap and helping this roadmap with the GRC2.
Thank you, Aurelio. Thank you, Aurelio, for your words also. My name is Hugo Mestre. I'm the Director of Software Development and Platforms at Integrity, part of the Devo team. And as Aurelio has said, I will try to give you a brief overview on how to increase cyber risk management maturity and also ensure global compliance with NIS2 using Integrity GRC. So let's try to materialize Aurelio's words with the platform. Integrity GRC was designed from scratch with this kind of challenges in mind. To plan, to achieve, to maintain, and to demonstrate compliance towards legislations. Regulations, standards, and frameworks, of course. As a result of operating the necessary processes posed by such requirements, and also addressing and mitigating risk. I'll start here on this custom hub we've designed specifically to gather all the necessary resources to operate a system to manage NIS2 compliance and risk. This custom hub has all the necessary tools to tackle this matter. And so let's start running through the options here. So where to start, where to begin as a CISO or as a consulting services provider, where to start tackling NIS2 compliance? Well, the best way I think is to create a roadmap. On Integrity GRC, you can create your own compliance or risk management programs and monitor the evolution of those roadmaps. So creating a comprehensive roadmap for NIS2 is crucial for your organizations to be able to manage and track their progress towards achieving their compliance. A well-structured roadmap also assures that all the stakeholders are aligned and understand their responsibilities. By breaking down this process into objectives, you can easily monitor which areas you need to focus more, you need to work more, which is getting completed faster, and where do you need to act further. Bringing this artifact, the roadmap on integrity GRC, unleashes the potential of tying your operations and activities, as you see here, with actual progress monitoring of the objectives. So where to next? We gather the necessary tools and materials to carry out this roadmap. Of course, the NIS2 directive is a legislation. It's not a set of cybersecurity controls and guidelines. So where does that leave us in terms of what to do technically and what to do operationally? Well, not to worry, because the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, ENISA, provides the necessary guidance here. As you see, they develop a set of guidelines, set of recommendations and best practices in order to assist EU member states and relevant entities to implement the NIS2 directive. These guidelines cover various aspects such as incident report, risk management, and other topics that cover things like authentication and identification and more. You can see that we have loaded these minimum security measures for operators on Integrity GRC. ENISA has developed this, and on Integrity GRC we will use all the measures listed here to map all of our actions, all of our allocated efforts in order to pursue compliance towards NIS2 while operating the platform. ENISA not only developed these minimum security measures, but also did the work to link these with other relevant industry references like the ISO 27001 and the NIST cybersecurity framework. Well, Integrity GRC also allows us to map and relate these amongst themselves. By connecting them in this fashion while operating the system, all the activities, the assessments, the risks, every action will be contributing to achieve compliance on multiple benchmarks simultaneously. Okay, moving on. Now that we have our compliance map, we can move forward and focus on other tools and materials. The assets. Of course, as previously stated, we need to identify the assets which carry and contain information and are linked to all relevant and essential services. We need these assets in order to conduct things like risk assessment, to identify and apply the necessary mitigation controls. And as you can see, each asset, of course, as a set of risks that can be identified on it, as a set of controls which can be applied in order to mitigate risks, and you can even do activities to cover the implementation of these controls. But regarding risk, I'll get back to this later on the presentation. So moving on, documentation. Of course, we need to create or enhance existing documentation to answer to all the requirements posed by NIS2. Documents like incident management procedure or risk management procedure, amongst others, are necessary to have a solid and structured approach to these topics, of course. But documents on Integrity GRC are not only a static artifact. You can use the documents as a guideline to implement activities, bring the documents to life, bring the documents to operational reality, so you can enact their context. So if a given document tells you to do X or Y, you can just create activities on the document and you can see what is being done in order to enact the document contents. So now that we have gathered our tools and materials, we can move on to other things like risk and start addressing risk and other requirements related. Of course, on Integrity GRC, risk management process has several things related. The risks in itself, the mitigation controls. You can manage risks by scopes. Here I'll be focusing on the NIS2 scope. As you see here, you have the organization's risks related with NIS2. Each risk may have its own severity, and you can identify all the risks either by threat or vulnerabilities or by simply creating a quick description. To keep these risks in check, you can do things like identifying and implementing mitigation controls, of course. And you can see here is a list of controls. But it's a lot more useful so you can understand the implementation status of these controls on your risks. And Integrity GRC allows this. So by each control, or if you want to see also by each risk, you can understand which is not yet being implemented, what is under implementation, and what is already implemented. And you can use this as a map in order to mitigate your risks. Moving on. I've talked about risks, but how do we arrive at these risks? How do we find these risks? So I'll tell you how Integrity GRC might help with that. To find these risks, we need to search for gaps. And in order to search for gaps, we can use either self-assessments on the platform or third-party assessments. I'll start by talking about the self-assessments module. I have here a self-assessment that's related to the NIS2, and it tells you how mature is your organization in terms of NIS2 compliance practice. An assessment is as easy as answering to a questionnaire and acting on the outputs from this questionnaire. What we have done with Integrity GRC here regarding NIS2 is we again took advantage of NISA minimum security measures, and we created a questionnaire in the Integrity GRC. This questionnaire is now ready to find the compliance gaps according to the NISA measures, and we are ready to start answering and understand how is our maturity evolving. Here you can quickly see each of the areas in which we are performing best or worst, which is our score, and how we are evolving throughout time. Because a self-assessment, you can iterate on your answers, you can improve over time, and use this as a tool to be covering these gaps. Moving on to third-party risk management, risk assessment. Well, we can use the same set of questionnaires here and the same logic. We can grab these questionnaires and start a third-party assessment in which we push these questionnaires to our third parties, and we can then follow up on their answers and see what is being done. Of course, every third party will also get a questionnaire like this. They'll be able to give their answers. Their answers will then trigger the outputs that will show us the gaps. The gaps, again, are risks, are activities, and you can quickly see here all the risks that were triggered by this assessment. But by operating these assessments, besides of risks, we get other actionable results. We get things like we understand which are the top performers, the bottom performers, in which category is our company third parties performing best or worse. We can also understand which of our third parties is bringing us more risks, which are the level of the risks, the severity of the risks that they are carrying to our organization, and also all the activities that are already ongoing to fill these gaps, let's say this way. Also, in order to keep monitoring these results and to know which actions do you need to take on your organization, we can create dashboards that take all the relevant data, things like overdue activities, total risks, accepted risks. You can see each of these data like documents and activities by their states. You can understand better the risks that are posed to your organization by looking at these charts that split the risks by phase or that split the risks by your assets. But all of this, this culminates on compliance, of course. And in Integrity GRC, everything is connected. Let me show you. Compliance arises naturally from creating and operating artifacts on Integrity GRC, documentation, activities, risks, mitigation control, so again, everything. In order to keep track of compliance or to show it to the auditors is as simple as navigating through the compliance module, clicking on the related resources, and show everything that, for instance, we are doing in terms of incident report to be compliant with the incident report requirements of NIS2. And so I hope this was a useful insight and that I was able to give you the proposed overview of how to increase cyber risk management and maturity, and also to ensure global compliance with NIS2 using our platform Integrity GRC. Thank you. I'll pass the word now to my panelist colleague.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gents. I'm Mauro Israel from Security Scorecard. I work as a Senior Customer Success Manager in Security Scorecard, and Devoteam is our partner, and I'm very glad to present you after those two brilliant speaking how to support the implementation of NIS2 with Security Scorecard. At this point, you see, okay, I'm done. I have to implement NIS2, but from where I start on our plan, our GRC, where do I start for all this? Well, the answer is that the internet is very nice. The people see it as stars and space and navigate through this without any control. And this is where we were hit, all of us. We were hit, all of us, because the hackers industrialized their action, and now they try to scan all the internet and to hit everyone. Before joining Security Scorecard, I was CISO of a very large healthcare company, and we were hit twice. Once it was in 2017 with WannaCry, and the other time was in 2020 with Cuba, which was a ransomware as well as WannaCry, and they blocked a lot of our servers, and we were in a real bad position because our job, our work was blocked as well. So we are all here because something went wrong. NIS2 was not existing if NIS1 was working, right? ISO 27001 version 2022 were not existing if ISO 27001 from 2013 was working. So, as many companies, we were ISO 27001 certified for more than 5 years, and we were also HDS, which is the French HIPAA, Hébergeur de données de santé. Oh, you see, I speak French, but here we all speak in English to be European compliant, right? So we failed. We have to be humble. All these attacks show us very clearly that we failed. And we have to address this failure. We have to learn about what went wrong. So NIS2 tries to address what is wrong in the previous frameworks, and the most important sentence out of the 150 pages of the NIS2 volume is that the security measures are not static. They have to evolve with the attackers. So we have to understand how the attackers do and make an effective response to those attacks. So the question now is, do we know how the attacker do really? The answer is called the meter attack framework or the cyber kill chain in a shortcut. All the hackers industrially, they just do a reconnaissance phase. They scan internet every day, many times a day. All the IP of internet are scanned. You are scanned by all these hackers group. And this scanning shows them some vulnerabilities, and they will prepare a Trojan horse through a phishing email that will be targeting your company because they gathered a lot of emails and eventually credentials of your company. Those credentials can be gathered on the dark web, and there is a market that sells credentials as well as other information of your company on the dark web. Everything starts with one computer that is compromised because one poor guy clicked on one email, on one link, on one attached file on this computer, and then we are dead. Why? Because the hackers are establishing a command and control, a C2, a peer-to-peer connection, totally stealth between the compromised computer of our company, even if the computer actually is in teleworking or outside of the company. And they will exchange information for days, weeks, or months. And finally, they will start the attack because they gather enough information to send a payload, a viral payload, into our organization through this initial compromission. Then they take control of the Active Directory, and then they start to spread with, of course, a golden ticket. So an account that is allowed to move through the networks and through all the systems, and they pivot everywhere. And one day, probably in the middle of the night or a weekend, they will start to encrypt all our computers and then ask for a ransom. This is it. This is the cyber kill chain. And this is exactly how everybody is hit at the moment. If we go into the details of the reconnaissance, they do like the burglars with the home stealth. They try to find high ransomware risk mountains, vulnerable companies in the middle of millions of vulnerable ports open. For example, here we have the open port 3389 that all the technical guys know it's RDP. And recently there was a RDP problem issue. And so the hackers, they started to scan all the people that had this open port. When this is finished and we patch, then they go to another one. You remember Log4j, you remember more recently ES6i from VMware, and even more recently we had other attacks, and that was leading each time to a shorter notice in between the vulnerability and the attack. For example, on ES6i in Italy, there were 3 days before all the national operator of Italy was down, and many companies were hit, as well as in France and other countries. So it's a very easy attack for the hackers. If they scan our attack surface, like here in the gym, in the mountain climbing, it's very easy if you know exactly where are the vulnerabilities, and our mountain hacker has just a very easy task by finding in network security or in DNS or in patching or in endpoint security or here in application security. And what we do at Security Scorecard is we see what the hackers see. So we scan internet as they do with the same OSINT tools, and we have an immediate response, and we do that every day out of 12 million companies. So instead of attacking the company, we gather all this information and we make a scoring. That's very interesting on a risk point of view, because if you have an F, like here, F46, F is the worst score, is red, and 46 is something between 0 and 100. The perfect score is A, 100. So if you have such a score, it's much more difficult for the hacker to attack your company, because it's very icy. It's very difficult to climb. And I don't say that you will never be attacked with that scoring, but the difference will be very substantial. And actually, if you see the blue line, we are above the blue line here, and the blue line is the average of the sector. And it means that, for example, a cyber insurance company or an investor or a supply chain, yourself as a vendor, will be in a good shape to be successful. And also for the compliance we've just seen, because a lot of the companies will ask for an audit to check the reality of your attack surface. So if you have a bad score, it's an easy attack. If you have a good score, it's a much difficult attack. How do we proceed to make this scoring? Very, very sophisticated algorithm that is mitigating the vulnerability, the scoring of the vulnerability real time, and we do reassessment very regularly of the attacks through the threat intel, and also to the number of IP that are exposed. Of course, you say, okay, we need just one computer that will be compromised, but actually there is also a Bayesian system that shows you clearly that if you're in a big number of vulnerabilities compared to the number of IPs, you will be hit more likely. So how the system, the security system of Security Scorecard works? First, we do the data collection. We started 10 years ago, and now we have a giant database with millions of IPs and vulnerabilities that are refreshed every day. We gather all this, we refresh it, and we have an overall grade from A to F. You are noting that there is no E, because E is something that does not exist in the American school. And yes, you found it. Security Scorecard is a New York City company, an American company. And so we took exactly the same grade as in the American schools. Everybody understands the colors. A, which is green, is nice. Yellow, you have to be careful. And if you go to orange or red, this is something, an alert. We aggregate with ponderation 10 key risk factors group, and this ponderation is based on the applicability of the attacker. So at the moment, we have a heavy ponderation on endpoint security, for example, and on DNS security because of the recent attacks. But we have 10 factors. We have application security, network security, endpoint security. We take care about social engineering because of the phishing email. the hacker chatter, we scan what the hackers say in the dark web, and if they talk about your company, we have an alert. DNS security, because of the fake, of course, domains that are used in the phishing attack. Information leak for the credential that leaked and allow attackers to connect to your Active Directory or any kind of directory. The Cube IT score, which is our artificial intelligence scoring that is gathering all the similar attacks and all the similar vulnerability and give you a specific score. The patching, of course, patch, you know it, but this is the patches that are exposed on the internet, and those ones, of course, are priority number one. And the IP reputation means you've been hacked, and when you've been hacked, you will be hacked again if you didn't mitigate the attack. So this is the most important slide of the presentation. You have here the 5 grades. So if you have an A, you have almost 8 times less likely to be breached than if you have an F. What does that mean? That means that you can do a metric in your risk. For example, if I have D, I have twice more risk to be hacked than with F, less risk, and so on. So what you have to retain is that 8, 6, 4, 2, 1. So if you have A, it's less risky, 8 times less risky than if you have F. This is it. But the attack surface is just a small part of the problem. It's an essential part, but if you want to solve everything, make a picture, a 360 picture of this, because this is mitigating all the cybersecurity attacks at the moment. Of course, it doesn't talk about the fire into your data center or the some other risks that are very common and very well known. We are talking about the risk that is the ransomware risk, and also could be the hacktivist and the nation state risk attack, like the DDoS attack we have seen on the French Parliament recently. So everything starts with the recognition, as you see, and you see all the cyber kill chain in white now, and in blue, your blue team is putting all these elements to protect you at the different stages of the cyber attack. There are 3 major points that are mandatory to protect you. It's the XDR, which is an awful acronym, combination of EDR and NDR. So it's endpoint and also network detection and response. So it's something that protects and alerts from your workstation or networks. And then this goes to a SOC, which is very important, because the XDR itself, it's not like the antivirus, cannot work if you don't have people in front of the screens that analyze this. And then you have the immutable backup, which is not a simple backup, is a backup that is protected against encryption, so against the attackers by specific techniques. At this point, I just have 1 minute to show you a real scorecard. And can you see my screen? Yes, I guess so. And I will go to a company I know, and I will show you how it works into a real security scorecard. So here you have C71. This is a scoring. You notice it's not a very good scoring, and I've lost 20 points here last month. So why? Because here I see that everything is nice except two items, network security and application security. Let's dig into the details. And here in a high severity, I have weak protocols. Those weak protocols are something that the scanner found, and you see it's very fresh information. And unfortunately, on this FTP, I'm on TLS 1.0, 1.1, and you know the best practice and the NIST recommendation or NISA recommendation or ANSI recommendation is to have at least TLS 1.2. So this puts me in high severity. Why? Because the hacker are exploiting at the moment this. So this is exactly what the hacker see. And here the hacker see that I have a website in HTTP. Which website? The cPanel that is actually administrating my domain. So I have to rush on the hosting company to ask them why they left the cPanel in HTTP. Means, of course, that if I have a man in the middle, I will be able to intercept the very complex password I have here as a hacker. So at the end, what do? Very simple. I have a plan, and I have to go to A93, for example. And how do I do this? I will split all these actions through the IT teams, depending on what they do, and I will immediately recover 10 points here on the weak protocol, for example, or the HTTP instead of HTTPS, or 4.2 points. So I will grab here almost 15 points. So this is something that I can do for myself, but I can do it also for a portfolio of the supply chain. For example, suppose I want to work with those companies, not European Union, I will not compare them. And here I have the 6 companies in the RFP. And what do I see here? I see this company has a very bad D63. So maybe those ones I will cancel the RFP for them. And those 2, I will ask them to reach B level, for example. And this one is obviously qualified, and those 2 also, like Uber. And here I have also the history over 12 months, so I can see if a company slips down, and I can put an alert on that, so I can monitor my vendors, I can monitor them through time, and I can invite them to improve their own scoring as well. You see here, Uber had here a breach, an incident. Of course, their IP reputation was bad, and then they recovered silently because they had decayed information. Not like a pen test, we use only fresh information, and information that is basically more than 45 days old. We just don't use it anymore for the scoring. So you have the guarantee to have a very fresh scoring all the time. And this is very important because we are in a dynamic attacking world. And so there is also a dynamic answer. And this is answering exactly what NIS2 spirit is to be aware of the security measures, security controls that are related to the attackers. Okay, I'm out of time. So I think there are maybe some question and answers, and I will give back the screen to the audience.
Okay, thank you, Mauro. I think that we are already out of time, so we need to conclude, and I hate conclusion because it gives the impression that we are done with this topic, and we are not done with this topic about compliance of the NIS2. We have seen that bringing your organization into compliance with NIS2 was not an impossible step. We have strategies that already exist. This is mainly a question of time and a question of maturity of your organization. We saw at the very beginning of our intervention with Cassandre, the question is not such more about the mandatory compliance of your essential or important entities within the meaning of the text as a will of the European legislator to impose a uniform regulatory framework for member states of the European Union. So we thank you for your attention, and we remain at your disposal for any question. We receive any question, and we will treat this question now. We also have the publication of a white paper on the NIS2 topic. It will be available on our website, and we send it to respective email address for the participants. And yes, we have a question. So the question was, on sector included on NIS2, there are banking and financial market infrastructure, but those sectors shall apply DORA by January 2025. And DORA is a lex specialis, that is saying that this text is already covered by a specific text. And the question is how manage these two different regulations for those kind of sectors. And maybe Cassandre, you could give some explanation.
Yes, actually, the principle of lex specialis doesn't say that, for example, DORA completely replaces NIS2. In fact, it's not a coincidence that NIS2 and DORA were adopted the same day on the 27th of December of 2022. And the Council of Europe in the last edits of NIS2 has made possible for the text to be aligned with DORA. So basically, the answer is that both apply. If DORA has a more specific rule, then you should look to DORA. And in terms of security, you should take the rule that is from NIS2 or DORA that is the highest level of security.
Thank you, Cassandre. I don't know if you have received any question. Okay. So thank you for being here today with us. And I think that the video will be available. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.